हेलो फ्रेंड्स, केजी क्लासेस में आपका स्वागत है। आज हम आपको रॉबर्ट ब्राउनिंग के लॉन्ग आंसर के बारे में बताएंगे। क्वेश्चन फिफ्थ है, राइट इज नोट ऑन ब्राउनिंग्स ट्रीटमेंट ऑफ लव। आंसर हेडिंग है कंजुगल लव दिस द बेसिस। हिज ओन कंजुगल लव फॉर हिज वाइफ एलिजाबेथ बैरेट ran a happy course and forms one of the great romances in literature. Intellect, passion and an equal sense of parenthood on the part of both were the major factor that brought about such a perfect union of their intense personalities that it is difficult to think of the one without the other. But he was never entangled in the bitterness of youthful passion, as it never prevented him from exploring the hopes and disappointments and other multitudinous joys and rivers of love which his dramatic genius suggested. Consequently, there is such a bewildering variety of love themes in his poems. Adding a treatment of actual passion. In his love poems, he does not treat of absolute love of ideas, or love of one's own country, nor is the content with merely celebrating the physical charms and beauties or moods of the fair sex. He treats of the actual passion. He confines himself to the love between man and woman. His poems expresses the isolated passion of one sex for the other. But the way in which he treats of such love is different from that of Shelley. Browning love has no individual notes about it. It is not merely sensuous, but it is intellectual. In his own life, he had not experienced romantic love, and such as he analyzes human love as though from a high pedestal. He tells that love wiser, steadier, graver, with less selfish forms, while he feels for love. He analyzes it, even dissect it, as he writes about it. As for example, in his poem By the Fireside, he is recalling those blissful moment when he met his beloved wife in youth. He deviates from the intensity of the recollection into a discussion of what might have been if she had not been what she was. Thus, Browning's love poems have no strong personal touch. One reason may be that love poems of this kind are naturally lyrical and demand a sweet melody in the verse, but Browning's genius was not lyrical, nor could he inevitably command a melodious movement in his verse. But the main reason is that his mind was taken up with other and graver matters, chiefly with the right theory of love, and besides, his genius was mainly dramatic. Having a love a surer way of exalting the soul. Love. Another notable thing about his love poetry is that it is particularly helpful for understanding his philosophy of life. According to him, there is no failure for a man struggling for a noble cause. The struggle itself is its own reward, fulfillment, a triumph. It is an elevation of the finite towards the infinite. But for Browning, love is a surer way of exalting the human soul to a higher life, because love breaks all barriers of selfishness and narrow outlook, and releases man from the prison walls of his own. Absorbing self-love destroys all isolation and helps a person to mingle perfectly with another without losing one's individuality. Heading A, optimism in love. Love in itself is a reward. Another important aspect of his conception of love is its optimism. Just as according to him effort is its own reward or triumph, so also love in itself is fulfillment. Again, just as to glorify failure is his favorite theme, so is the glorification of the tragedy of unfulfilled love the subject of many of his poems written after his wife's death. The characteristics note in them, however, as in prospect, is that of love triumphing over death. He recognized only one real tragedy of love, that of false love, which falls and fades away for want of sincerity and courage. Thus he never had anything to do with purely tragic and hopeless cries. He glorified even unrequited love. Many of his poems are songs of fulfilled love, adding a dramatic element in love poems. The love poems are essentially dramatic. He is never satisfied merely with sudden outburst of grief or of ecstatic thrills. On the contrary, he creates definite and novel situations. He places his main character in one of those situations, and with the help of that situation brings out the personality of that character and reveals the subtle emotion and their subtle changes most vividly and forcefully. The success of this dramatic exposition depends entirely upon the poet's thought, understanding of his character, and Browning's power of fully understanding his character was invariably supreme. That is why, in respect of penetrating psychoanalysis of hair splitting dissection of human motives and emotions, Browning's dramatic love lyrics remain unrivaled. Thus, the romantic dramatic lyric as a new form of poetry is Browning's discovery and gift to literature, adding a blend of idealism and realism in love. Lastly, in spite of his philosophical conception of love as the meeting point of God and man, Browning's sentiments and emotion of love is sternly realistic, and the realism of his love poetry is amazing. Chesterton remarks, sentiments must have reality, emotion demands the real field, real widows, homes, the real corpse, and the real woman. And therefore, Browning's love poetry is the finest love poetry in the world, because it does not talk about raptures and gates of heaven, but about window panes and garden walls. It does not deal much with abstraction. It is the truest of all love poetry, because it does not speak much about love. It awakens in every man the memories of that immortal instance when common and dead things had a meaning beyond the power of any millionaire to compute. He expressed celestial time when a man does not think about heaven but about a parasol, and therefore he is firstly the greatest of love poets, secondly the only optimistic philosopher except Whitman. Heading a division of his love poems, personal and impersonal. His love poems may be roughly divided into two groups, personal and impersonal. In all his personal poems, By the Fireside, Epilogue to Men and Women, and Prospice, dwell upon the devotional love which he had for his wife. Some of his impersonal poems are Love Among the Ruins and Two in the Campagna. In these he describes love with the seriousness of one who has left youth behind. He represents not the love of happy youth, but love tossed on the stormy seas of manhood and womanhood. Its love is intermingled with graver thoughts of life. Next question is, write a note on Browning's optimism. Answer: the vigorous manliness of the poet. Browning, the healthiest and meanliest of all poets, is intensely optimistic in his view on life and things. No lover of Browning's poetry can miss the vigorous manliness of the poet's own bearing or fail to recognize the strength that flows from his joyous, fearless personality and the might of his intellect and heart. He conveyed the depth of the joyous meaning which the poet found in the world. He had the invaluable endowment to see the sunny side of life. I find earth not grey but rosy, heaven not grim but fair to of hue. Do I stop, I pluck a posy, do I stand and stare, all's blue. Adding a despair turned into joy. Charlie's cry of despair is turned by Browning's into a song of victory, while the formers regard the struggle between good and evil as a fixed battle in which the forces are immovably interlocked. The latter has the consciousness of battling against the retreating foe, and conviction of coming triumph gives joyous vigor to every stroke. Browning lifted morality into an optimism and translated its battle into song. An outlook of religious faith and moral power. Heading है, Arthur Symons says of all poets, Mr. Browning is the healthiest and manliest. His genius and is robust with vigorous blood, and his tone has the cheeriness of intellectual health. The wind that blows in his page is not hot and languorous breeze laden with scent and sweet, but a fresh salt wind blowing in from the sea. His poetry is a tonic. It braces and invigorates at a time mid-Victorian age when men and women were very much troubled about their souls, and many of them were asking doubtfully whether life was quite worth living. After all, he brought a gospel of invincible religious faith and energizing moral powers, answering their misgiving in the words of his own Pippa. God's in hell, his heaven, all's right with the world, adding a hopefulness of belief. He has such hopefulness of belief in human nature that he shrinks from no man, however clothed in evil. His investigations of evil are profoundly consistent with an indomitable optimism. He has woven his song of hope right amidst bale and bow of man's sin and wretchedness. He sees the reflection of the sun in the depth of every dull pool and puddle. This vivid hope and trust in man is bound up with a strong and strenuous faith in God. Browning's beliefs in the ultimate triumph of good over evil. The Quato Chesterton Browning in such poems as Bishop Blougram Apology breaks this first mask of goodness in order to break the second mask of evil, and gets to the real goodness at last. His Dadrons a saint in order to humanize a scoundrel. He also believes that with such men in the world who strive after good, it would become difficult for evil to last long. There shall never be one lost good. What was shall live as before. The evil is null, is not, is silence implying sound. What was good shall be good with for evil, so much good more on the earth the broken are in the heaven a perfect round. Browning also expresses his love of this world in spite of all its imperfection and ugliness. O world, as God had made it all's beauty, the imperfections and failures found in this world do not turn him away from this world. Rather, it is his firm belief that life succeeds in that it seems to fail. In fact, the every consciousness of the world imperfection implies a design of perfection in man's mind. While admitting the perfection in man, he still remains an optimist, believing in the possibility of achieving perfection. His theory that man's sense of his own imperfection implies a design of perfection is a very good argument for optimism. He is buoyant and cheerful even in the midst of miseries and failures. He enjoys this life with his heart and soul. How good is man's life, the mere living, how fit to employ all the heart and the soul and the senses forever in joy. Thus Browning preferred this world to all other worlds in spite of all its imperfections, miseries, and failures. To Brownings, the fulfillment of desire means spiritual death, for it removes the high, remote ideal that has given motive power to the soul. Browning believes that our soul emanates from God and like him is immortal. He says in Ravi Ben Ezra, earth change but thy soul and God stand sure. It is due to this faith that Browning does not fear or hate death. In prospect, he says, I would hate that death bandage my eyes and forbear and bade me creep past. He considered that to be only a stage in and a gateway to an eternal life of the soul, with an infinite future given by God's grace. Death is only a passing phase. It will yield place to the life in heaven. He hopes to meet his beloved in heaven. He says in the poem Prospice, O thou soul of my soul, I shall clasp thee again, and with God be the rest. Heading life an endless struggle. Brownings aptly calls himself a fighter. He faces death boldly. He says, though a battle to fight, ere the garden began, the reward of it all, I was ever a fighter, so one fight more, the best and the last. Similarly, the dejected lover of Evelyn Hope is not disappointed at the death of the girl whom he used to love. Evelyn Hope is the lament of a man who loved a young girl who died before she was old enough to appreciate his love. But the lover can bet his love will not be lost, for he gains of the ages, and the climes will not satisfy him without his Evelyn Hope. She will be given to him in the end. Heading है Dallas Canmere. A modern woman critic says in a world of destruction and death, misery and moping, scarcely a thought is given to the significance. The true meaning of joy, to be joyful, is really an obligation, in fact a religious duty, which no doubt sound strange, but only because a minority, a mere handful of people throughout the ages of man's development have ever stood a great deal. He was essentially the great Christian poet of all time. That is why his message was always a message of joy and of life. Browning thus is an optimist to the core, like Carlyle, he preaches a doctrine of strenuous endeavor. He is not a mere ascetic. He finds all times good, though virtue is the best imperfection and failures are man's glory. The ideals which the soul illuminates are beacons in the far distance. Their unattainability is both the prophecy and the indication of progress. For the man who strives for a noble ideal, there is no failure. He very effort is fulfillment is triumph. Next question is write a note on Browning's obscurity. Answer heading है Browning's obscurity, opinion of critics. Much ink has been spilled in probing and disproving to that Browning is an obscure poet. Spirited defense of Browning has been made by sympathetic critics like Arthur Simon, G.K. Chesterton, Swinburne, Mrs. Orr, and others. But despite all this defense, it is hard to absolve Browning of the charge of unintelligibility and difficulty. In his of age, Browning was considered very difficult and obscure and hence could not achieve popularity and recognition like his contemporary Tennyson. When Sordello was published, it was regarded as a hopelessly obscure poem, more obscure than any other poem in the English language. Mrs. Carlyle read the poem and could not judge whether Sordello was a man or a city or a book. The glory goes that Douglas Jerrold, just recovering from a long illness, read the poem and as he could not understand even 2 lines of it, exclaimed in great panic, "My God, I am an idiot. My health is restored, but my mind is gone." Such stories, whether true or not, are undoubtedly telling comments on the difficult nature of the poem, and the difficulty of Browning's poetry increased with the passing of the time. Heading है obscurity, not the result of pride or profundity. Browning certainly is a very difficult poet. Johnson calls him the Carlyle of poetry. Various reasons are given for the obscurity and difficulty of his poetry. According to some critics, obscurity of Browning's poetry is a piece of intellectual vanity indulged in more and more isolantly as his years and fame increased. But as Chesterton points out, all the record of Browning's long life and career show that he was not at all vain. All his contemporaries agree that he never talked cleverly or tried to talk cleverly, which is always the case with a man who is intellectually vain. It is psychologically improbable that the poet made his poems complicated from mere pride in his powers and contempt of his readers. Chesterton, according to the learned critic, the poet was not unintelligible because he was profound. What unintelligible because he was humble. Browning did not elaborate, explain, mend, clarify because he was humble and so did not think that he had anything new or significant to say. He was humble enough to think that what he knew was quite commonplace and was known even to the man in the street. Outward obscurity in the case of Browning is, as in the case of others also, is a mark of inward clarity. His own concepts were quite clear to him. He found nothing difficult or profound in them, and so thought that it was equally obvious to others. Neither was Browning obscure because he was profound. He was frequently profound, and he was occasionally obscure, but the two things have little to do with each other. He is dark and elliptical even in poems in which there is nothing abstruse or philosophical, as in the following. Hobbes hints blue strength. He turtle eats novels print blue claret crowns his cup, knocks out dares stroke in azure's feet. Both Gorge, who fished the murex up, what porridge had John Keats. It is fantastic, it is grotesque, and is enigmatical, but there is nothing philosophical about it. Browning is not because obscure, because he is a philosophical poet. The real reasons of his obscurity lies elsewhere. In the passage in question, the obscurity arises from Browning's use of the unfamiliar and unusual. Murex, the key word in the passage and essential for its understanding. More often than not, the key word in a passage is missing, and so it becomes dark and obscure. Heading is some reasons for Browning's obscurity. Obscurity in Browning's poetry results not from any one reason but from a number of reasons, which may be summarized as follows. Heading a high conception of poetry. Browning had a very high conception of his own calling. He did not care to cater to the taste of the reading public, who were used to the easy and smooth verse of Tennyson. He once wrote to a friend, "I never diligently tried to puzzle people as some of my critics have supposed. On the other hand, I never pretend to offer such literature as should be a substitute for a cigar or a game of dominus." He believed that a poet should try to put the infinite within the finite, and so should suggest much more than he describes. According to his view, poetry has never been generally understood, but the poet should not care of it. His business if with God, to whom he is uncountable. Thus Browning's theory of poetry accounts to some extent for the difficult nature of his poetry. He requires some painstaking on the part of the readers as well. It is not a kind of poetry to be read merely to while away a leisure hour. Heading his novelty. Browning was a highly original genius, and his poetry was entirely different from the kind of poetry to which his contemporaries were used, and its very novelty hampered understanding. They were used to short lyric, and so found Browning's long, argumentative and philosophical poems tiresome and boring. Heading a soul dissection and interior landscape. Obscurity is inherent in the dramatic monologue, the form of poetry which he made particularly his own. Browning's dramatic monologues are soul studies. They study the shifting moods and changing thoughts of a developing soul. It is always soul dissections. It is thought and thought all the way. It is always interior landscape with no chronology or background or elucidatory matter. Of obviously, such a poetry is bound to be difficult, having an interest in the odd and the abnormal. This difficulty of comprehension is further increased by the fact that he was interested in the curious human soul and tried to prove that odd and the abnormal in human psychology. He sought the sinners whom even the sinners had cast out and tried to show that even they might be generous and humane. He tried to reveal the essential nobility and humanity even of such a mean impostor as Sludge. Heading a Browning's learning. Browning was a very learned poet, and his learning is a stumbling block in the way of his readers. His schooling was mostly private, and so his learning was more profound and through than of those who have been educated at school. He had gone through all the stupendous dictionaries of Dr. Johnson, and his knowledge of history was encyclopedic in its vastness. He knew in details the history and geography not of one country but of a number of countries. Many of his poems requires a knowledge of medieval history and out of the way periods of Italian history, as his readers lack such a vast and exhaustive knowledge. They find him obscure names from the geography and history to other countries are often a stumbling block in their way. This is particularly the case with poems like Paracelsus, Sardello, and Ring and the Book. Next, heading obscure references and allusions. Many of Browning's poems are heavily overloaded with his stupendous learning. There is frequent use of Latin expressions and quotations. There are allusions to little known literary, mythological, and historical sources. André del Sarto and the Grammarian's Funerals requires detailed information of medieval and Renaissance art and culture of Europe. Poems like Old Pictures in Florence, Soliloquy of the Spanish Cloister, and One Word More are beyond the comprehension of an average reader for this region. The very title of certain poems, as for example, See Brandes Virginesis, and learned and forbidding. Browning sought his subject in many lands, and his allusions are drawn from many little known sources, having a use of far-fetched imagery. Often Browning's metaphors, similes, and illustrations are far-fetched and recondite, as in the Campagna and in Memorabilia, having a telegraphic style. Often Browning writers a telegraphic style. Relatives, preposition, articles, even pronouns are left out. At other times, words are contracted, participles are clipped, and vowels are suppressed. It might be that his pen failed to keep pace and the rush of his ideas, but such telegraphic style is certainly confusing and bewildering for his readers. Next, heading a disregard for grammar and syntax. Browning's frequent inversion and the use of long involved sentences heavily overloaded with parentheses create almost unsurmountable difficulties in the way of his readers. In poems like the Grammarian's Funerals, he not only breezes the grammarian but also grammar. Next heading है his grotesqueries. Frequently he coins new word, usual compounds and expression and is too colloquial, jerky, abrupt and rugged. These faults make a poem like of patchy eroto almost unintelligible. His grotesqueries and eccentricities may startle and capture attention, but more often than not they obscure his meaning, as in Rabi Ben Ijra. Heading है excessive condensation. When his Sardello first appeared, he was accused of verbosity and sincere, and since then he made it a rule to use only 2 words where than 10 were needed. Obviously, such comprehension and concentration cloud the sense. As a result of such density, the readers are likely to suffer from mental or even imaginative indignation. He admits this complexity of his poetry in Rabi Ben Ijra. Thoughts hardly to be packed into a narrow act, fancies that broke through language and escaped, and in Poland we are told, for fancies followed thoughts and bore me off and left all indistinct, ere one was caught, another glanced. Last heading है conclusion, exaggeration of Browning's obscurity. However, the obscurity of Browning's poetry must not be exaggerated. As Duffin points out, the majority of Browning's shorter poems are read as easily as the verse of Tennyson. Poems like Evelyn Hope, The Last Ride Together, The Patriot, Porphyria's Love, Prospice, My Last Duchess, Home, Thoughts from Abroad, etc. are perfectly lucid and simple. The intelligent reader can enjoy most of his lyrics and his longer poems in blank verse after a little mental adjustment. Even in his thorniest poems, there are passages of great originality and eloquence, of classical beauty and easy comprehension. Thanks, best of luck.